Does the president believe, based on those comments, that Israel's conduct in this war thus far has been in accordance with international law?
We have every expectation that Israel will do exactly what they say they're doing, which is to continue to go after the terrorist leaders and to do so in a way that minimizes civilian harm, as I said in my opening statement, as the president has said. That's their intent, and it's important that the results match that intent.
And so the president was saying yesterday that the results have not thus far matched that intent?
He was expressing concerns that we continue to see civilian casualties in Gaza, and again, that we want to make sure that as they work to minimize, that they actually have those kinds of results, that they are able to minimize civilian casualties.
And so your colleague at the State Department today said that there was not a formal U.S. government determination that Israel was engaged in indiscriminate bombing. Is the president's comment yesterday, was he speaking for the U.S. government there? He's obviously speaking to donors, but is the U.S. government's position that Israel was engaged in indiscriminate bombing in Gaza?
The president was expressing concerns again, as I said, about the civilian casualties that we've seen, and again, it's reflective of our constant efforts to urge the Israelis to be as precise and careful as possible. And again, we know they've stated their intent to reduce civilian casualties, and they have acted on that. I mean, the way they went into the north in a much smaller force than they had said they were going to do or planning to do, by publishing a map online so that people know where to go, by agreeing to additional now daily pauses in the fighting. I mean, they are making efforts and they are taking steps, but we want to see, of course, we want to see more results in that regard. That's what he's referring to.
The president in that same fundraiser said that Israel needs to make a change to its government. What exactly did he mean by that? Does he mean Netanyahu has to go?
The president realizes that Israel is a powerful, vibrant democracy, and any change in the government is going to have to be determined by the Israeli people.
Thanks, I appreciate it. If the president believes Israel is engaging in indiscriminate bombing, wouldn't there be an obligation from the U.S. to put new conditions on military aid?
Every bit of security assistance we give any other country always comes with the expectation that the law of armed conflict is going to be respected and obeyed. As I said earlier, we're not going to assess every single airstrike here from this particular podium. That wouldn't be appropriate. The Israelis should speak to their operations, but we have every expectation, as I said to my previous answer there, that they will act in accordance with the law of armed conflict and do everything that they can to match their intent, which is to minimize civilian casualties.
But if they aren't, then isn't there an obligation for the U.S. to change the way that it's delivering military aid?
That's a hypothetical that I'm not prepared to engage in right now.
Hypothetical if you say indiscriminate bombing.
That's a hypothetical I'm not going to engage in. We have expressed our concerns, the president has, publicly and privately with the Israelis, about the need to reduce civilian casualties, and we're going to continue to do that. I expect you'll see Jake address this too when he's in the region.
And on the hostages, is there a concern that hostages could be held in tunnels that are potentially being flooded?
Well, some of the hostages come out and said that they were held in tunnels, so it's not beyond possibility that Hamas could be holding at least some of them in tunnels as they move them around, which we have to expect that they'll do. But if you're asking about the flooding specifically, I'm not going to speak for Israeli military operations. They should speak to that. I would just say that we all need to remember the particular extra difficulty that they have going after a group like Hamas, which isn't just a terrorist group, but it also has sort of a military structure to it, and they deliberately tunnel under civilian infrastructure to allow for the movement of their fighters and for storing equipment and things. That adds an extra burden on the Israelis. And I would just say again, without confirming these reports about flooding, that as we've said before, we recognize their right and responsibility to go after Hamas, which is posing a particularly tactically difficult problem for them by using tunnels, but to do so in a way that reduces damage to civilian infrastructure above the ground and certainly reduces any chance of civilian casualties inside those tunnels, which would include hostages.
Thanks, Kareem. Does President Biden want Bibi Netanyahu to get rid of hardliners in his government?
It's not for us to dictate terms to a foreign sovereign government. Israel is a democracy, and the Israeli people get to decide what that government looks like, and they did. And we respect that. That's what democracy is all about. We're not dictating terms to the Israelis one way or the other.
What did he mean yesterday when he said he wanted Netanyahu to change? Was he talking about getting more aid in? Was he talking about more surgical strikes? Was he talking about hardliners? What was he referring to?
It's up to the Israeli people to determine who is going to represent them in their government. The president has, of course, been very candid about some of the concerns that we had about like judicial reform in the country and where the cabinet was going on certain issues. And he expressed those concerns as a real friend of Israel, somebody who loves and respects Israel and has for his whole public life, that we want to see Israel, whatever they decide to do, to move forward with the broadest consensus possible. And it's in that spirit that he's talking about it.
And just a quick one on Jake's trip. Is he planning to visit elsewhere in the region? And what will his message be to the Israeli war cabinet in terms of any kind of schedule for the Gaza conflict?
I don't have any other specific stops to speak to today. That said, it is likely that he will make other stops in the region. It won't just be going to Israel. We'll have more to say about that when we can. And his message, again, I don't want to get ahead of him. I certainly want to do that. He'll have a chance to talk publicly while he's in the region, but clearly he's going to talk to them about progress on the battlefield, how it's going. He's going to talk to them about reductions in civilian harm. He's going to talk to them about trying to get another pause in place so that we can get more hostages out. He's going to talk to them about the need to get humanitarian assistance, keep that flowing. It has been flowing even when the pause stopped, and I think he'll explore opportunities to see if we can increase that. Again, possibly, hopefully, through Kerem Shalom.
Thank you, Admiral. You're being asked these questions because the president has a tendency to say things about foreign policy and leave them hanging, and we don't get to ask him to clarify himself, so apologies if this gets pedantic for people listening. But did he misspeak yesterday when he said that Israel was carrying out indiscriminate attacks?
You had the opportunity to hear him yesterday on foreign policy when he stood next to the president of Ukraine, so I take issue. I'll take issue with the premise of that question, but the president speaks for American foreign policy. The president speaks and has spoken, Ed, about our concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza and about urging our Israeli counterparts to be more careful and more deliberate.
You just said he speaks for foreign policy, and he said yesterday that there were indiscriminate attacks, which to the rest of the world is a war crime. So why isn't the United States not saying that that's what
the president was speaking to his concerns about making sure we're seeing the results that Israel has claimed is their intent, which is to reduce civilian casualties. That's what he's talking about.
Thank you, Corinne. John, I'm sorry. It seems that this interaction between you and my colleagues. It seems that to me the president is making some pretty clear signals to the Netanyahu government, but it seems like you're trying to walk it back. I mean, I don't know if that's correct or not. So please walk me through it. Is the military strikes, military campaign by Israel, is it surgical or indiscriminate according to the administration at this point?
As I've said a whole bunch of times since I've been up here, we're not going to armchair quarterback this from this particular podium. Let me finish. We're not gonna characterize every airstrike. We're not going to speak for Israeli military operations. The president was reflecting a concern that we have had for some time and will continue to have as this military operation proceeds about the need for reducing civilian harm and being as precise and careful and deliberate as possible.